Good morning. Um, Glad to join you one more time in Ruth. I think we're going to move on from Ruth today to First Samuel, but what a wonderful book this has been. I hope you've been enjoying it. I'm wondering, have you ever wanted something at first glance, and then at a closer inspection of that thing, you realized you didn't really want it? Not long ago, Nikki and I and the boys were at her parents' house. We were visiting, and Nikki's dad, he is always preparing breakfast for us, so he's cooking breakfast, and he asked me, do you want a glass of milk? And I said, yeah, of course, I would love to have a glass of milk. But as I watched him pour the glass of milk, and as I watched the chunks fall out of the jug, I immediately changed my mind. I no longer wanted that glass of milk. It no longer looked good to me. And that's kind of what happens in Ruth 4 today when Boaz asked this other redeemer. So if you remember, he says, I want to redeem you, Ruth, but there's a redeemer who's closer than I am, and I'm going to talk to him first. And at first glance, this redeemer wants Naomi's land. He wants to be able to redeem Naomi's land, but he doesn't realize what comes with that. So when he asked him, this is what it says, Ruth 4:3-4. Then he said to the redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling a parcel of land that belongs to her relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one beside you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. The Redeemer hears that this could work out for his advantage. He sees that there's this piece of land that Naomi is now having to sell, and he jumps on the opportunity to purchase the land. Maybe he can expand his vineyard or build a vacation home, or it seems like a good opportunity for him, and not only for himself, but also to participate in helping his close relative Naomi. So why not? He says, yeah, of course, I will redeem it. But then Boaz continues on. He said, it doesn't just have to do with the land. He says, then Boaz says, the day you buy it, the field from the hand of Naomi, you will also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So immediately, this other Redeemer's tone changes when he realizes what he has to redeem. But what changed? Why does Ruth, the adding of Ruth on this, change everything? It's because she's a foreigner, because she's a Moabite. You see, it was Moab in Numbers 25 that the men of Israel, in Moab, that the men of Israel started to go after other gods, started to marry in, and they started to disobey the first three commandments of God. So we read in Numbers 25, when Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to the Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And not only that, but the nation of Moab comes from that ludicrous act in Genesis 19 where Lot's daughter gets him drunk and sleeps with him. So that's where the nation of Moab comes from. And then we see in Numbers 25 how they've become this nation after other gods. So you see, to redeem Ruth the Moabite was almost certain death to the character of this Israelite, this other redeemer. It would taint his name, just as he says, I can't do that, lest I impair my own inheritance. But Boaz, on the other hand, He looks past the pain, the tainted past of this woman and the nation that she comes from, and treats her as a sojourner in the land of God's chosen people. That is the difference. He treats her as one of those who have come into the safety of God's chosen people. And he decides to be gracious and treat her kindly, to act as her redeemer, even though he was not legally obligated. He didn't have to do that. So these two get married, and they live happily ever after. They have a son whose name is Obed, and Naomi is just overwhelmed with joy. She begins this book by saying, "Don't call me pleasant, call me bitter." And at the end, she is just ecstatic with how God has really shown His loving kindness to her. But not only that, Obed fathers Jesse, and Jesse fathers David, and David becomes the king of Israel, to whom God promises an eternal reign. And from this story, from this woman who comes from a different land, who follows her mother-in-law into the people of Israel, is redeemed by a worthy man, and then from this story comes a better king, a better redeemer, Jesus Christ, the Son of David. When we get to the New Testament, we read that in Matthew 1:1. That's the very first thing we read. And Jesus becomes our redeemer. Even though we are tainted with sin, he leaves his inheritance in heaven. He leaves his everything, and he comes down to taint his reputation, to make us sinners his bride. And when he redeems us, we're no longer labeled sinners. We're now labeled sons and daughters of the one true King, the elect, the chosen, the saints, a people who, those who were not a people are now a people. And just as Ruth is placed in the lineage of the Messiah, as we see in Matthew 1, so are we as we become the bride of Christ, our Savior and our Redeemer. So what great love is this? I want you to reflect on this wonderful love of Jesus Christ. If you're a child of God today, realize what a great love he has shown to you by becoming man, and taking your sin so that you could become a child of God. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, "For our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." Have a blessed day. God bless you.